So back into our series today. Feel free, what to do with how you feel. Now this, as I've told you over the last couple weeks, this is less of a teaching series and more of a journey. We've been going on kind of this journey together in community and looking specifically at the relationship between kind of spiritual belief and spiritual following after who God is and our emotional health and emotional maturity. And what we've been exploring is the key connection between spiritual health and emotional health, and spiritual maturity and emotional maturity. And last week, we got to look specifically at our story-shaped emotions, okay? That we're all story-shaped people, that you and I don't just kind of rationally and logically work through life. We feel our way through life, and we do that by way of telling dominant stories about what is valuable, who we are, who God is, what's important, what life is about. And so last week, I would just encourage you, if you have missed any message in this series, it is so important to be able to just go back, jump on our podcast, listen, and catch up, because each of the messages in this series are integral to kind of understand the journey that we've been on and where we're going with all of this. And as Pam prayed this morning, it's not psychobabble, it's not self-help talk, it's not that you can leave here feeling better. It's that each week as we come and get around the gospel and look at who God is, we leave and we move towards wholeness. Not feeling better, but being whole, okay? And so that's what we want to continue doing today. And how we're going to do that is specifically, we're going to look at the role of our past. We're going to look at how our past shapes us, and specifically look at the role of our family of origin. Now, some of us, right away when we think about our past, it brings back great memories. Some of you, you're nostalgic about the past. You have sights and experiences and smells and all sorts of things about the past that are just amazing. They fill you with joy. Others of us, we left the past in our rear view a very long time ago. And to revisit the past, it's a painful place. We don't come from kind of a clean slate. Our past reminds us of trauma. Our past reminds us of brokenness. And I've been pretty transparent throughout this series. My past, I tried to leave my past in my rear view too, because it was just less painful. And for me, as a brand new follower of Jesus at 18 years old, to work through my past over the first 5 or 6 years of my relationship with Jesus was a very painful thing to do. But it's also the most redemptive moments I've had in my relationship with God. And so, wherever you are on that, we have to understand, regardless of whether your past is a place of joy, of good memories, of nostalgia, or your past is a place of pain, and you'd rather not even go there today. You're like, Dustin, no, I'm just going to blank this one out. I'm going to think about what's for lunch. Let me just remind you, regardless of where we're coming from, regardless of how we think of our past, one thing is certain for all of us, that our past, good or bad, good and bad, has a profound impact on who we are and how we are. It does. And that is positive things too, not just negative. But it is also the negative. Regardless of how good your past is, how secure your family was, how stable your relationship with family members have been over the years, even if that's you. Maybe you're the golden child. Maybe that's you too. Regardless of that, regardless of how good or clean our past looks, we all have baggage. You and I are a product of carryover from our past. We are. Our presents are profoundly shaped by our past, for better and for worse. And that's what I want us to lean into today. Now, today's going to be a little longer of a sermon. Welcome to Reach Montreal. So it'll be about 2 hours, okay? Just kidding. Maybe not. We'll see how it goes. But I want to slow down a little bit and really take this time to kind of teach through some things and pull in kind of key research around our family of origin at an emotional and relational level. But then I want us to dip into scripture, and I want to show you where this is on display and how important it is, okay? That's what we're going to try to do. Now, I will say, for those of us who the past is just a painful place, I will just say that some of us have had things said to us that should never be said to a human being. Some of us have had things done to us that should never be done to a human being. And that's a painful place to go. But every single one of us has baggage that has made us who we are. And so I want to make sure we slow down and really experience the fullness of that. And in the coming weeks, as we walk in community together, we're going to do a lot of work on our past. We're going to do a lot of work to try to locate us in the present, understand our past, and then how does that equip us and change us to move forward into the future? This is why I think a drama TV show like This Is Us is so well done. Anybody? Yeah. All right, boys, seriously, don't leave me hanging. All the men are like, nope. Not today, Satan, not today. But this is why the TV show This Is Us is such an immersive experience. It's a raw, visceral display of how generational decisions have impacted the next generation. For good and for bad, for better and for worse. The past, although can be a painful place, what we're going to see this morning is that it's also the place that we must revisit. We must. We don't have an option. Because it's only by going back that we can go forward. And it's only by going back that you and I will see God at work in ways that we have forgot. And that's the redemptive part of this. This week was tough for me. I revisited a poem that I wrote when I was 19. And the poem was on the past. And it was amazing. I wrote this poem out of an expression of pain and hurt. But now, 16 years later, when I read it again, I see God's fingerprints all over it. I see his redemptive work all over broken, hurting 19-year-old Dustin. So, for those of us where the past is painful, you have to understand it also is where healing comes from. It's also where we experience restoration and redemption. And all throughout the Old Testament especially, God shows up through prophets, priests, and kings. And he tells Israel, remember, go back so that you can go forward. They're not mutually exclusive. It's not an either or. It's a both and. And some of us are paralyzed today because we haven't been able to go back yet. So I want this today, not just this moment today, but I want this coming several weeks together as a church for us to be a place to say it's okay to feel the past. And it's okay to go there, because what I can promise you is that even though it's painful and even though it is difficult for many of us, it is a place where God will use it to heal and restore us in ways you can never imagine. And that's the good news. That's what I want us to be invited into today. Your present and future emotional health and maturity depends on it. It depends on us going back. Okay? So that's what we're going to do. Now, studies have shown that our family of origin is by far the most influential thing about who you are today. Crazy. For better or for worse. It is the first social group you belong to. It's the first peer group that you belong to. Your family of origin. There's few things as important in shaping a human being as the family of origin. And your relationship to your parents and your siblings in so many ways will actually dictate your relationship to the world you live in. For better and for worse. All of us have heard studies of the formative years, 0 to 8. Gabriel is 7. As soon as he turns 8, I'm like, okay, well, see how this plays out. And that's true, but it's not true. But it is very true that there's something so formative about relational development in our formative years that we learn subconsciously. We just absorb how we relate to the world around us through those formative years. So as we go back, I don't want you to just think about your teenage years, like, oh, I made some decisions, I had some nights where I blacked out, I want you to think even further back and go back to your family of origin. And what's really important when we do that is that we have a sober lens on things. And here's what I will say. Some of you are already uncomfortable because you feel like it's actually dishonoring to your parents or your siblings or your family of origin to go there. It's not. One of the ways that you can honor your parents and honor your family of origin for good or for bad, whatever those experiences were, is to go back. Is to understand that we are dealing with parents and siblings and aunts and uncles and cousins who are human beings. And that we've all been given beautiful things from our families. There's amazing things that come from every family of origin, regardless of how painful or dysfunctional. But even if you are the golden family and the golden child in the golden family, there is also baggage that you have inherited, whether you think so or not. So just have permission throughout this series and have permission today to go there. Not to dishonor your background, not to dishonor your past or to dishonor your parents, but actually as a way to honor who you're coming from and to honor God in the process. That's what we want to try to do. Studies have shown that your family of origin literally shapes who you are and how you are. That every single one of us has behaviors and patterns of thinking and feeling that we have subconsciously absorbed from our family of origin. In a very real way, going back to last week, our family of origin gives us our dominant story for life. It gives us the dominant story and worldview by which we're going to go through the rest of life. And some of those things are great, and we use them as tools throughout the rest of our life. Others of those things need to be unlearned and relearned because they weren't the right tools for life. And it's only by going back to see where they come from that we can challenge and kind of figure out and have dialogue with our dominant story so that we can have a new redemptive story and move forward. Pete Scazzaro, in Emotionally Healthy Spirituality, writes this, quote, "In emotionally healthy churches, people understand how their past affects their present ability to love Christ and others. Numerous external forces may shape us, but the family we have grown up in is the primary and, except in rare instances, the most powerful system that will shape and influence who we are." It's science. It's just proven. I want to parse this out a little bit and give you some categories to think of because some of you are going to have a hard time locating yourself. Some of you are going to, right away, some of you are like, oh, I know. I know what I've inherited. Like I see my dad come out. I see my mom come up. I see my brothers and sisters come through me. I know it very clear. It's very clear. You don't have to tell me. Some of us struggle. We don't really know yet. Or we're not even at a place in our life where we've taken the time to examine it. Or maybe it's just too painful and we haven't gone there yet. But I want to slow down. I want to just parse this out and give us a few categories for understanding how our family of origin does this. First, our family of origin teaches us how to process and express anger. If you grew up in a home where anger was repressed, you probably repress anger. Maybe some of you grew up in a home where there wasn't really a lot of emotion showed at all, and then the furnace door blew off, and chairs went flying, and plates went across the room. Right? Like that, how anger is processed and expressed is something that leaves a stamp on us. It leaves a fingerprint on us. Some of us, sarcasm is a gift, and we express our anger through sarcasm in good Canadian fashion. We don't say things directly, we just say them indirectly with sarcasm and get away with it. But in our family of origin, how anger was expressed leaves a significant stamp on us. Why? Well, because when we're children and we're on the other end of our parents' anger, it leaves a serious mark. Also, what was not talked about in your family of origin? Silence about a topic speaks. Some of you came of age and became a teenager or became an adult, and for the first time in your life, were exposed to realities or topics that you were like, what? Like, why was I never talked to about this? And sometimes we think that silence is the right way to treat things in our family of origin. I read a book about trauma in the family, and it talked about the pain that silence causes is actually far greater than addressing topics in our family. So for you and your family of origin, what was taboo? What was off topic? What never got talked about? When it did get brought up, it quickly got squashed. We don't talk about that. That's not how our family does things. Moving on, stress. Coping mechanisms. How did our family of origin handle stress? How did we cope with it? How did we talk about feelings? How are you showing love and affection in your family? Maybe your parents were not affectionate with their words or their actions. Maybe, like my stepfather, He didn't hear "I love you" from his dad until he was well into his adulthood. Some of us were shaped by that. How are you shaped? By how affection is shown in your family. Next, what about culture? Our culture has a significant impact on our family. For some families, culture is everything. We are Italian. We are Irish. We are Jamaican, right? Others, we're trying to distance ourselves from culture because maybe there's baggage we've inherited and we don't want to associate with that culture. Some of us, we grew up in families where culture is the literal identity. Everything comes out. We're just like that because we are fill in the blank. So behaviors, good or bad, are excused as a cultural thing. What about gender roles? How were those practiced in your family of origin? What did mom do? What did dad do? Maybe dad wasn't there and mom did everything. Maybe mom wasn't there and dad did everything. How did the gender roles play out? What were you told about gender and responsibilities and the complementary nature between man and woman in your family of origin? How was that demonstrated? What about the relationship with your extended family? We've all got those. The weird uncles, the weird aunts, the weird cousins, or maybe you're the weird one. Maybe you are. And you're like, I never talk about the weird ones. It's because everyone else is talking about you. Is your extended family close? Like just this big extended family. Like you are tight with your cousins. Maybe some of us, we don't even know who our cousins are. There's brokenness and scatteredness through our family line. We don't even know our extended family. Or maybe the extended family has been cut off on purpose because so-and-so did this. Who are the scapegoats and the golden family members? The scapegoats, kind of like Uncle so-and-so did that, that's why he's cut off. Or you know what, that's why I struggle like this, because your uncle did this to me. Or your aunt said this to me when I was 12. Who are the golden children? The pressure put on you to be like that extended family member. If only you were more like your brother. If only you were more like your uncle. If only you could be successful at business like your aunt. Where are the scapegoats and golden family members? What about the impact of the order that you've fallen in your family? Are you the eldest? Are you the middle? Do you come from a large family? You come from a small family? Are you an only child? Are you the youngest? Parents are definitely not perfect, and they change throughout life. And an eldest child is treated very differently than the youngest, whether we like it or not. It just happens because life. And when your joints are sore and you're in your 30s and you have a baby, you treat them differently than when you were killing it when you were 24 and had a baby. It just happens. You don't love them any less, but your family of origin is shaped by that. Your family of origin is shaped by those dynamics that happen in your family. Okay, moving on to topics. How was money treated in your family growing up? How was money discussed? Maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was all that was discussed. Maybe money was the thing. Material possessions, living in a neighborhood, and making money. That was the thing. Maybe some of us come from a family where money was taboo. We just didn't talk about it. Maybe some of us come from wealth, and others of us come from poverty. That shapes us. It shapes our relationship with money. It shapes our relationship with possessions. It shapes our relationship with others. It has a profound impact for how we understand and the trajectory of our life. Maybe some of you still think, as long as you just make enough money, then you will prove yourself. Then mommy and daddy will be proud. Then your uncles and aunts will feel like you're one of them. Maybe there's still that pressure. Another key topic, what about the role of work? Maybe you grew up in a household where you had a very strong, driven family who worked very hard, but it was workaholicism. Maybe you grew up in a very unmotivated, lazy household. No one really did anything, just kind of waited for things to come to them. Some of you have inherited a workaholism where your work has become a mistress in your marriage. And it still is. You're still trying to balance. Like, how do I understand the role of work, and then the role of family, and then the role of everything else in my life? Last topic, what about sexuality and romance? Maybe that was the taboo. Maybe all you got was, don't have sex until you're married. Maybe it was just a pattern of sexual dysfunction and brokenness that your family was patterned after. Maybe there was a religious veneer over it, so it's just like, that's just not It's just not what God is like. We don't talk about that. We don't read Song of Solomon, that's for sure. If you don't know what that is, and you're married, read it with your spouse this week. It's a fun book. And last, what about religion and spirituality? What have you inherited from your family of origin about who God is, what God's like? Maybe you come from an atheistic home, and religion is for the weak. Religion is for the simple. Maybe you come from a functional atheistic home, where it's like you go to church, you do religious things, maybe on baptisms and first communions or whatever, and you just kind of do those things. But religion really is just a compartmentalized thing. Shouldn't really impact you at any real level. You just kind of have a religious veneer over the rest of life, and the rest of life is really the important stuff. That's where life happens. Or maybe you come from an amazing spiritual heritage where Jesus was at front and center of everything that happened in the life of your family. That profoundly shapes you today. Whether you're in your 20s, your 30s, your 40s, your 50s, your 70s, it shapes you. And some of the things that shape us from that are good things. Others of them need to be unlearned. So, beyond those compartments of our family of origin, that's just a little bit of like locating ourselves. Okay, just locating us and figuring out like maybe some of those touch points helped you locate some of the things that positively or negatively you've inherited and absorbed from your family of origin. Then there's other things. There's other more painful things. There's other more raw things that are a little bit more in your face. Things like addiction, substance addiction, or a long line of sexual abuse or gambling. Maybe there's a long line of unfaithfulness and affairs and separations and divorce. Just brokenness in marriages and romantic relationships. Maybe there's real stamps of abandonment and emotional unavailability that you remember. Maybe you had a family that had unhealthy boundaries and were overbearing and really encouraged codependency, and you're still trying to shake that. Maybe your family is just a long line of children born out of wedlock, or the experience and brokenness of abortions. Maybe there's a long line of mental illness and mental health issues and abuse. Those things profoundly shape us. Now, the good news out of all of this, I just want us to locate yourself. The good news is that the Bible, remember, the Bible is not one book. The Bible is a library of books, and it is one long showcase about families like yours and mine. It's one long showcase of dysfunction. It's one long showcase of a terrible story being written by human beings and a God who is trying to enter into history and rewrite and redeem broken stories. That's good news. But that is the story of the Bible. Now, I was going to go lots of different ways with this because there is so much. Like, there's so many examples. I could just list name after name after name of dysfunctional people in the Bible. But I think the best place to go is, first of all, to see God's teaching on this, and then we'll give you one example of a family that was severely dysfunctional, yet the whole earth is blessed because of them. Exodus 20. You remember in Exodus, we have the people of Israel released from slavery. God shows up in power and strength, and he releases them from Egypt. And then he shows up and he gives these 10 words. In Hebrew it's called the 10 Commandments. Now what's the context of that? Well, God frees Israel, and then what does he tell them? He tells them how to stay free. He doesn't drop the 10 Commandments out of heaven and say, slaves in Egypt, obey that, and then I will release you. He releases them, then tells them who he is, and then says, you want to stay free? Here's how to live free. So Exodus 20 starts this. We're going to read the first 6 verses of the 10 Commandments. Watch this. And God spoke all these words saying, starts off, I am Yahweh your God, names himself, personal, relational, knowable, who brought you out of the land of Egypt. Now that's what he does. He tells them who he is, and then he tells them what he does. I am a God who frees. That's what I do. Brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. First commandment, you shall have no other gods but me. And then he continues. Everything comes back to that. The second, you must not make for yourself an idol of any kind, or an image of anything in the heavens, or on the earth, or in the sea. You must not bow down to them or worship them, for I, Yahweh your God, am a jealous God who will not tolerate your affection for any other gods. And he continues on. I lay the sins of the parents upon their children. The entire family is affected, even children in the third and fourth generation of those who reject me. The Hebrew's a bit stronger than that. It's those who hate me. But I lavish unfailing love for 1,000 generations on those who love me and obey my commands. Now, usually when we read these verses, everyone gets caught up on the visiting the iniquity or sin on the third or fourth generation, and they go, no. A jealous God who visits iniquity on the third and fourth generation, I want nothing to do with that God. And we ignore the 1,000th generation that receives blessing for those who pursue him. What kind of God does that? What kind of math is that? That he will only allow iniquity and generational brokenness and dysfunction to continue on for third or fourth generation before he cuts it off and enters in to redeem and heal. That's an amazing God. And if that happens, guess what he promises? Thousands of generations will be blessed because of that redemptive moment. My redemptive moment came at 18 years old on a Saturday night. And now I get to walk with a limp and stumble towards Jesus, trusting that for 1,000 generations, my family is going to feel the effects of a redemptive moment. That's the God that we serve. Now that's good news. That's not bad news. That's good news. A God that would free people who have enslaved themselves and then tell them how to live free. And notice the whole point of this passage is proper worship. Notice that. It's like, here's the God I am, here's what I'm like. Now let me tell you how to worship properly. Let me tell you how to live properly. And let me tell you how to order your loves correctly so that your life is lived to the fullness. It's that God. Now let me just say and pause. When we talk about worship, we do strange things with it. We do unbiblical things with it. We call singing worship, like that's worship. Yes, that's an act of worship, but you and I live a life of worship. We all do. Worship is not something that is for religious people to do religious activities. You and I are worshipers, whether we like it or not. If you will consider yourself non-religious, that's fine. You're welcome here, but you're still a worshiper. Worship is not a religious category for religious people. It's what we do every day by living in light of something. We all live lives of worship because we give our life over to an end. Something that we look at to say, I'm going to give that thing. I'm going to pour out myself, all that I am and all that I do towards that end. And that end is going to justify me. That's worship. And we all live as worshipers. David Foster Wallace, an atheist, brilliant novelist, who ended his life in suicide in the 80s, wrote this. Now listen to how profound this is about somebody who ultimately ended their life because of this weightiness. Here's what he said, quote, "In the day-to-day trenches of adult life, there is actually no such thing as not worshiping. Everybody worships. The only choice we get is what to worship. If you worship money and things, if they are where you tap real meaning in life, then you will never have enough. You will never feel like you have enough. Worship your body and beauty and sexual allure, and you will always feel ugly. And when time and age start showing, you will die 1,000,000 deaths before they finally grieve you. On one level, we all know this stuff already. It's been codified as myths and proverbs and cliches and epigrams and parables. It's the skeleton of every great story. The whole trick is keeping the truth up front in our daily consequences." End quote. Not a professing believer, but somebody who is profoundly in touch with this existential reality of human beings. That we live life to give ourselves over to something. So our core problem is not religious. Our core problem isn't that we do bad things, it's that we overvalue good things. We overvalue things like sexuality and romance and money and success and affluence. We overvalue here and now. We overvalue our family members. We overvalue things that are good in their right place. The 10 Commandments are given as a way to say, you are a people who knows me, now live like it. Live with loves that are ordered correctly so that you thrive, so that you flourish, so that you are free and you stay free. That you once were slaves and now you are free. Don't worship non-gods hoping that they will give you what God only can. Now that's where the 10 Commandments come out. We've done weird things with the 10 Commandments, right? Then we run into stuff like, I'm a jealous God. And you're like, not my God. Nope. Did you know that Oprah Winfrey, growing up in the Baptist church, it was this verse that was poorly taught and interpreted that had her at a young age say, I don't want to worship that God. Now the rest of her life has been lived on the trajectory of nonsense. If you like Oprah, I'm sorry. It's nonsense. It's crazy that we look at something and say, like, I'm a jealous God, and we make that a negative thing. Now listen, one of the most beautiful things about the nature and character of the true God is that he's jealous for your affection. That he's passionate about you. Now listen, as a spouse, if your spouse brought home a girlfriend or boyfriend for dinner tonight, I would hope that the last feeling you would have is tolerance and acceptance. If Raquel decided to have a boyfriend and bring him home for dinner, the last thing I would feel is affection and tolerance. I would do prison ministry from the inside. Why? Why? Because I don't love her? No. Because I do love her. I'm jealous for her. I'm passionate for her. I exclusively want her, and she exclusively wants me. That is the background motif of the entire Old Testament, where Yahweh will refer to himself as a lover. That he's a lover who pursues Israel. There's entire books of the Bible that take the motif of husband and wife. A passionate, romantic relationship between the God of Israel and Israel. And that Israel is the one whoring herself off to other things, to non-gods. To non-gods. And brokenness comes. Not because he doesn't love, but because he does. The whole theme of Exodus leading up to this is that sin enslaves and God sets free. So what do we need more than anything? Well, we need proper worship. And the generational piece that comes into this is that proper worship leads to a chain reaction of blessing. But false worship leads to a chain reaction of brokenness. But this God is so passionate that he will only allow that to feel the effects of that for 3 or 4 generations until he once again enters in with a redemptive moment to rescue and save slaves. Oh boy, what a story. It's amazing. Every time you see the number 1,000 in your Bible, especially in Revelation, it comes from the Hebrew idiom. 1,000 doesn't just mean 1,000. 1,000 means forever. Always just kind of a nod towards forever. And it's an eternity that God is going to make sure blessings continue until there's no more brokenness and only blessing forever. Isn't that amazing? So how do we deal with generational sin then? What's the deal? In the church, we've done really weird things with this too. Because why? I don't know. We're weird. What generational sin doesn't mean is that God is bound to curse you for your father or grandfather's sin. God is not a witch doctor bound by some weird curse. God is sovereign over all things. God is not bound to punish you for your mother or grandmother's sin. Deuteronomy 24:16 says exactly this. Fathers shall not be put to death because of their children, nor children because of their fathers. Each one shall be put to death for their own sin. Sounds comforting. But here's the point. You are accountable for your sin. Not your spouse, not the blame shifting you do because you had a bad daddy, not because you didn't get hugged enough, not because there was substance abuse. You are. Now here's where the blessing enters in. If it doesn't mean that God has to punish us for the sins of our father. What it does mean, though, is that your father and your grandfather and your mother and your grandmother's decisions affect you. That's what it means. It means that every decision, good or bad, everything that leads to flourishing and everything leads to dysfunction, ultimately does have collateral damage to the ones closest to us. For those of us in the room with kids, this is so frightening. Whether they're biological children or adopted children, this is so frightening. That for better and worse, my kids are going to bear an imprint of who I am. Trust me, I know what goes on in this mind day to day. That's bad news. But striving towards a life of true worship, of proper worship, invites every generation for thousands of generations into a life of flourishing. If you're single, not yet married, and don't have kids, maybe that's the future for you. And this is a humbling thing. Being a parent changes everything. And you're exposed to your dysfunction in ways you never knew you had it before. It's amazing. You watch a child behave in such a way. Raquel and I do it all the time. You look at Gabriel do something or Raina do something, and you're just like, just like her mother. It's never after me, of course. But there's things your kids do, and you just go, wow, they come by that, honestly. Jeepers. Like father, like son. And sometimes it's a great thing. Other times it's frightening. And it leads to humility. It leads you to bow a knee and say, God, if you don't rip this out and change this, by golly, it's not going to end well. But that's what this verse is getting at. That literally and biologically, in the very makeup of who you are in your DNA, you carry the imprint of your family. You do. Trends, anger, marital problems and challenges, addiction and violence and greed and lust. But is it nature or nurture? Yes. Yes. It's both. It's nature and nurture. We pick these things up by patterns of behavior and then copying them, but we also have these things literally in our DNA. Tim Mackey, one of the founders of the Bible Project, puts it this way, quote, each generation's failures make the next generation's environment in which they grew up even more difficult to be faithful to Yahweh. And because of that, it's like the compounding interest of sin and destructive family habits keep accumulating over the generations. That's the point of this passage. This is why so many of us are still so deeply impacted by a divorce decades ago. Why? Well, because that impacts us. It shapes us profoundly. This is why a grandparent's affair can lead to a trickle of dysfunction. This is why a great-grandparent's addiction can lead to generations of dysfunction. Or, for the positive, this is why the love of our parents can impact us today, or financial responsibility in a family can impact generations. Or a spiritual heritage of great-grandfather and mothers who loved the Lord can impact us today. And we're the product of prayers, and we're the product of faithfulness. So for good and for bad, for better and for worse, this is just a reality. Now, what Exodus is doing for us is helping hyperlink us back to a specific family. The reason why Exodus uses specifically third and fourth generation is because it is pointing us back to Genesis. Now remember, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Deuteronomy, and Numbers, okay? These books, the Pentateuch, they're always kind of hyperlinking back to each other because it's one library of books. Can you think of a family that's for 3 or 4 generations not only brings the world blessing but also a whole bunch of dysfunction? Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now, so many of us come from like Sunday school stories about Abraham who had many sons, okay? This family was an utter train wreck. And the reason why we miss it sometimes is because we do our devos and we walk into Genesis and we read like 3 verses, and then we come out and be like, Lord, speak to me today. Why does having many wives have spiritual impact on my life? You know, it's just like, what? It's because we're not reading it comprehensively. We're not reading it at the right level. I'm just going to summarize it for you. There's going to be 4 things I'll point out about this family. Each generation's failure makes the next generation's life that much more difficult. Here's a couple examples. First, there is a wicked pattern of lying and dishonesty. Crazy pattern of dishonesty in this family. Abraham lies about Sarah being his wife twice because he's insecure because she's too pretty. I've thought of trying that one. And it'd be like, yeah, Raquel's my adopted sister. Wouldn't work. But twice, this is his plan. It's just like, you're not my wife, you're not my boo, you're my sister. And she's just like, sounds good. And then they just do it, right? It's like, what? Like, so right away, you're just kind of like, okay. Like, if we saw that in a TV show, we'd be like, this is a good show. Right? This is a dramatic TV show. I like this show. Isaac and Rebekah's life is dominated by lies and manipulation. Terrible relationship. Jacob lies to literally everyone, to the point where his name means liar. It's like, hey, how are you? Greedy. No, what's your name? Greedy, right? Like his name is deceiver. That's how much he just lies. And he comes by it honestly. He's just like, I'm just a liar. By the 4th generation, 10 of Jacob's sons fake the death of Joseph, lie, cover it up, have a funeral, and then move on. Imagine that family. Yeah, he's dead. Wake, funeral, burial, the whole 9. Then they just move on. What a family. So not only are lies and dishonesty there, secondly, a favorite child is always the center of the story. There's always the golden child. Abraham favors Ishmael, but Sarah wants him out here. Imagine the parental tension in the desert, no less, right? Isaac favors Esau. Rebekah loved Jacob. Jacob later favors Joseph, and then later Benjamin, because he just changes his mind. It's like, okay, Benjamin, you're the youngest. I'll take you instead. Third, there's sibling rivalry and dysfunction all over the place. The tension between siblings is raw. It's all over the place. Isaac and Ishmael are cut off. Jacob flees Esau, only to be reconciled many, many years later. Joseph is left for dead and cut off from his 10 brothers for more than a decade until they're reconciled. And fourth and finally, sexual sin and selfishness comes into the picture big time. Abraham has a child with his side chick, Hagar. Isaac had a terrible relationship with Rebekah, shown mostly in the favoritism of their kids. Jacob has 2 sister wives and 2 side chicks. What? Sister wives and 2 side chicks. Like, he's busy. Like, 1 is enough. He had 4. Okay, so here, I just slow us down because we tend to like heroize these people. Just like, I wish I was like Abraham. I don't know. Jacob, he was the best. And I'm telling you, I could go through any family in the Old Testament and we could have just as much fun. David? Like, let's stop making movies after like Noah and all them. Let's make a David movie, because that other thing will go great. The dysfunction and drama are amazing. But even with this dysfunction, even throughout Genesis, let's fast forward to Genesis 50 and watch this amazing moment where after 10 brothers all agree, let's bury him, he's dead to me. We hear Joseph say something that is truly profound. Watch what Joseph says after reconciling with his brothers. They come to him. He's the head honcho with the Pharaoh. And here's what Joseph says. Don't be afraid of me. What? Like, they left him for dead. And he's like, no, don't be afraid. It's okay. Let's talk about this. Am I God that I can punish you? You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good. He brought me to this position so I could save the lives of many. No, don't be afraid. I will continue to take care of you and your children. So he reassured them by speaking kindly to them. God stepped in at the 4th generation and had someone like Joseph encounter Yahweh in such a radical way that it led literally to us being where we are today. On the other side of the Messiah, on the other side of Christ's redemptive work. That's the kind of God we serve. The God who we can understand and look in our past and say, what somebody intended for evil, God has used it for good. That's the God we serve. Now there's a God. God is the only one who can redeem and use the ugliest parts of our pasts to bring about life. And Scripture is a testament of that God. To the point where he would pursue rebellious sinners to the cross and then take everything upon his shoulders once and for all people, so that we can look forward to forever only experiencing blessing. So here's the key. To come to Christ and live life with Christ and follow after Jesus, yes, we become a new person. Amen. Yes, we're a new creation. Absolutely. God definitely redeems our past, but he doesn't erase it. Life as a new person, a new creation, and living with a new family of origin, with new brothers and sisters, is actually the very thing that's at the heart of the Christian story and identity. Why do we miss it? Because of our individualism, mainly. We miss that the gospel changes who we are because it changes who our life belongs to. We miss it because we reduce the gospel to a personal relationship between me and God. And we miss that all of the dysfunction and pain of our past family of origins is actually the new family of origins in the family of God, is where that dysfunction and brokenness is healed. New brothers and sisters. Jesus demonstrates this all over the Gospels. In Mark 3, Jesus is out doing Jesus, being Jesus, as you do. And his mom and brothers come looking for him, his literal mom and brothers. And they're like, hey, Jesus, we're going to do this thing. And they're trying to get to him. And he's in a crowd, whatever. And his disciples come and say, hey, your mom and your bros are looking for you. They're outside. And Jesus' response is what? Who's my mom and my brothers? Now, right away, we're just kind of like, oof, Jesus with the sting, right? Jesus is throwing family jabs. No. Jesus was revolutionary in his approach to family, because what he was saying is, yes, that's my family of origin, but you are my new family of origin. That everybody that comes and knows God as Father is now my brother and sister forever. And the community that we belong to is not just a byproduct. And that's the thing. In Western Christianity, we've done this. We've made community an option. No, me and Jesus. What? Personal relationship between you and the Lord is literally a statement never found in the Word of God. It's not there. But we do it. It's just not there. And so for you and I to live life renewed and new, we need to step into the new family of origin that we're called into. And an inheritance that stretches back to the beginning of time. That's what's amazing about it. One example, and then we'll wrap up, probably. Galatians 3, I'll throw it up here. Galatians 3, watch what Paul says. For you are all children of God through faith in Christ Jesus. And all who have been united with Christ in baptism have put on Christ like putting on new clothes. It's your identity now. There is no longer Jew or Gentile, slave or free, male or female. That's past stuff. See that? Doesn't matter the family you're coming from. Doesn't matter your family of origins. Doesn't matter your situation and your dysfunction and the past that you're coming from. For you are all one in Christ Jesus. And now that you belong to Christ, you are the true children of Abraham. See that hyperlink? Taking our inheritance back to a dysfunctional, messy family that God decided to step in and bless all nations through. You are his heirs, and God's promise to Abraham belongs to you. Amazing that this is the inheritance, that a new family of origin that goes back to the beginning of time and stretches future into eternity is what we're called to be a part of. And this is why the primary motif for the gospel is adoption. Because it doesn't matter where you're coming from. It doesn't matter the brokenness. Because God creates a new you and a new creation and a new identity, but he doesn't erase where you're coming from. So it's important to be able to go back. But it's more important to sit in the gospel reality and see the true story of a God who has sent his own son to rescue sons and daughters and bring them home. That's why the gospel is so beautiful. So last, Jesus doesn't call his followers, his apprentices, to just kind of hang out on Sunday, see each other once a week, say, how are you, good you, and then move on. Like a religious veneer of happy, smiley people is the goal. It's just not it. And if we settle for that, church, I do think it is an idol. So what we want to do as a church is we want to step into the full reality of this new family of origin that Christ makes possible for us. Because when Jesus talks about his followers, he intends his followers to function as a new family of origin for a new life lived in him. Which means that we need to relearn things. You with me on that? Coming here and listening to this and then going and doing your week and then coming back week to week, you're not learning anything other than the 30% of what I say up here you actually absorb. How do we learn something? We practice it. And Jesus was very practical in discipleship. Everyday life, life on life, rhythms in community of actually doing life together. That's how people became mature disciples. To live a new life in Christ doesn't erase our past. It places it in its right place. Some of you have thought that coming to Christ, the point was to have spiritual amnesia about where you're coming from. God's not going to waste where you're coming from. God doesn't want you to have amnesia about the past. What he does want to do is he wants to enable you to look in the rear view and understand where you're coming from so that you can continue to move forward. And the rightful place to do that as followers of Jesus is in the body of Christ. If you don't learn how to put off old patterns and learn new patterns to live out, it's very possible, church, to just only deal with symptoms of our past and never actually deal with the past. That's the problem. Dealing with the past well means actually putting off patterns of behavior in our family of origin and learning new patterns of behavior in our new family of origin. Right? So for example, just practically, how did my family of origin handle fill in the blank? Anger. How do I handle anger now in my new family of origin as a follower of Jesus? Right? How did my family of origin handle and treat money? How do I now, in my new family of origin, handle and treat money? Now that takes practice. Unlearning and relearning. Having instincts from our past crop up and trying to curb those and make new ones. That takes time. And it takes other people to do life with. It takes other people modeling that well who are a few steps ahead of the journey. It takes being reparented spiritually by people who are a little bit ahead of you. And that's the beauty of the church, is that across ethnic lines and cultural lines and experiential lines and family of origin lines and age brackets and experience with Jesus, we all can actually live together as one new family of origin and model life together and practice it well. So, to wrap up, going back is really the only way for us to move forward. This week in our city groups, we're going to start something called a Genogram. It's going to take you several weeks to work through. But a Genogram is really just a family tree, but it specifically focuses on the relationships and some of the major events, whether they were good or bad, that happened in your family that made you who you are. And so I'm working on kind of a handout, like a workbook, step by step of how to work through this. The first time I thought through my Genogram and worked through it, I was blown away by the third and fourth generation and the trickle down. And simultaneously broken by that because that's painful, but simultaneously motivated because now I have an opportunity to change things in my future generations. So that my kids' genogram is going to look very different. My grandkids' genogram is going to look very different. Why? Because there's a redemptive moment. Why? Because Yahweh. Because of his redemptive work. Because of his work on the cross through his son Jesus. And that we can come and be sons and daughters of the King. But where that starts, church, and what we're going to be invited into even now as we transition to communion, is following Jesus must include, it has to include, honest reflection on the positive and negative impact of our family of origin and how it shaped us so that we can learn to live life in our new family of origin.